Hey guys, it's Haley and welcome to another bookish video. Today I have a top 12 recs video for you guys. I love making videos in this series. I will link my entire playlist with all of my top 12 recommendation videos if you don't know what this is or this is your first time watching one. Basically, what I do in my top 12 recommendation videos is pick a trope, a subgenre, in this case a specific kind of setting, and I recommend you my top 12 thrillers within that subgenre, trope, setting, etc. And today we are getting into my top 12 thrillers that are set in an isolated setting. This has been inspired by one of the books that's on this list that I recently read, and I just remembered how much I love a creepy, eerie, isolated setting where it feels like it's just one character or a couple characters and they're isolated in this very unique place, being vexed by some kind of force, some kind of person, whatever, alone. To me, it always makes me feel like paranoid, like I'm being stalked, and I think being alone is one of the universal human fears. So this is a really, really effective setting for a thriller or a horror book. I believe in this video I'm just going to be going for thrillers. Maybe there's a couple horror leaning kind of books in here, but for the most part we're going to be going over thrillers. But before we get into the books, I do want to thank the partner for today's video, which is Rosetta Stone. If you've never heard of Rosetta Stone, they are an immersive language learning app. Within the app are pictures, audio, and native pronunciation tools. So you focus on context-based learning rather than simply memorization. This makes it feel so much more natural and so much easier to learn the language. I have grown up going to Mexico on vacation, and I feel like every trip I pick up a little bit more of the language. I would like to have more of a formal knowledge of the language as I go to Mexico in a couple months. So I have been learning Spanish on Rosetta Stone and I have been loving their features. They really help you have a personalized experience of using their platform, and they are the fastest and most effective way to learn a language. One of my favorite features that has been really helping me learn Spanish is the dynamic immersion, and it basically helps your brain just learn the language intuitively. They give you scenarios or pictures where your brain is going to automatically put together the pieces of what is shown to you. So you are learning the words through context and reasoning, and beyond just reading the words on the screen, I always feel like I sound like the whitest white girl ever when I'm speaking another language. Rosetta Stone's True Accent speech recognition feature provides real-time feedback on your pronunciation by comparing your speech to that of native speakers. This has been a game changer for me because it creates a low pressure environment to practice speaking, which boosts my confidence in speaking Spanish. So if you've been wanting to learn a new language, you can check out the link down below in my description and get 60% off the lifetime subscription to Rosetta Stone. That is unlimited access for life to learn all 25 of the languages they offer for an unbeatable price of 60% off. Thank you so much to Rosetta Stone for partnering with me on this video, and now let's go ahead and get into the books. The first recommendation I have for you is the inspiration behind why I wanted to make this video, and that is Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. I freaking love this book. It was my book club pick last month, and most people really, really liked it. It got pretty much unanimously positive reviews, or if there were some people that didn't like it, they said they still had fun reading it. Who we're following in this book is this guy, Grady, and his wife goes missing. She actually went missing while he was on the phone with her a year ago, and he still has not come to grips with this. They haven't found her body. They don't know if she's dead, but either way, he's still grieving. And he's also a writer, and his agent is like, okay, you need to take some time away, not only to resolve your grief, but also to write your next book because it's due. So go and stay in this remote little cabin on this remote Scottish island and try to work it out. And he goes there and he has visions of his presumed dead wife. Or is it her and she's coincidentally hiding out on this island? Or is he going crazy? We don't know, and that is what we find out over the course of this book. It is so cleverly written. The writing style is phenomenal. The different little points that it makes about how people see a relationship differently were really intriguing to me. All of the characters were so fully fleshed out, and the messaging of the book was fully fleshed out. The twists were also completely and totally shocking. Caught me off guard completely. Other than a couple plot holes, this is basically a perfect thriller, and the standout thing in this book for me was the isolated setting. I loved the way that the island felt so remote and so cut off from the rest of the world. It almost felt like a fantasy book. Like, it felt like another land. The way that this island and its inhabitants were so close-knit and different from the rest of society. It gave me that eerie cult-like kind of feeling, and it really set this book apart from a lot of other thrillers that I've read recently. It is definitely one of my favorite books with an isolated setting, and I had to make this video because of it. Next up, let's revisit one of my favorite thrillers of all time. That is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This entire book is set at a snowed-in roadside rest stop. So we are following Darby, and she is on her way home from college for winter break. She wants to check in on her mother, who is sick, and unfortunately she gets snowed in. Like, there's a huge snowstorm halfway through her drive home, so she has to just stop at this rest stop. And while she's there, she glimpses a child in a cage in the back of one of the cars that is parked at the rest stop. And she knows now that she is isolated, snowed in, stuck alone there with a kidnapper. So Darby goes on a mission to save this little girl and figure out who this kidnapper is. Obviously, because the whole book takes place at this little rest stop, it is totally and completely isolated. We also have the aspect of the weather that's making them even more isolated and cut off, where they can't have cell service, they can't phone for help. It is a heart-pumping journey the entire way through. This book is so fast-paced and so shocking. The plot is tight. Like, it just catapults you right all the way through to the end. If you're looking for a bingeable thriller, this is definitely that. And at the same time, it has a lot of heart to it still. Just because it's fast-paced and thrilling doesn't mean we lose out on the emotional connection with the characters, because I was nearly in tears at the end. It was so emotional. This stays one of my favorites of all time. You've probably heard me recommend it before if you've been around here for a little bit, but because of the isolated setting trope, I just couldn't not put it in here. Next up, we have The Spare Room by Andrea Bartz, and this domestic thriller was so much salacious fun. It actually is a COVID thriller, which I know those kind of get a bad rap, but I feel like I'm at the point where if it's done well, I have no problem reading about pandemic kind of things within a book, and that definitely lends itself to the isolated nature of this thriller. We are following a woman who immediately, as soon as the pandemic starts, realizes that she wants to divorce her partner. So she is panicking because she doesn't have anywhere to quarantine, and then she remembers this old friend. I can't remember if it's like a friend from college or a friend from high school, but she and her partner are like, hey, you know what? We totally understand what you're going through. I know it's been a while, but why don't you just come and quarantine with us? We got this big, beautiful house in the suburbs. Come on, we have a pool, we have snacks, it'll be fun. So she goes to quarantine with them, and thus ensues a very uncomfortable, juicy, and dramatic story of a weird threesome bisexual murder plot. It is so weird and so much fun, and it is certainly isolated. We see our main character getting wrapped up in these relationship dynamics and being completely overwhelmed by them without anyone to talk to. She's literally in the house with them, isolated all the time. She can't get a break from them. Every time she turns around, they're right behind the next door. She doesn't have many other people to talk to and process with, so she is isolated in her head, just trying to figure out what she's going to do about not only her previous partner, but now this new weird relationship that she's developing with this couple she's quarantining with. Things go absolutely off the rails. It is not too deep, but it is so much dramatic fun, and I feel like nobody talks about this book. If you're looking for an isolated thriller that's not just super creepy but has more like drama to it, I would highly recommend The Spare Room. Next up, let's talk about The Final Scene by Steph Nelson. This is a standout thriller from last year. We are following a woman who has been kidnapped, and she's taken to this remote cabin in the woods and told that she has to play act her kidnapper's trauma. Literally, the kidnapper's childhood trauma is acted out in scenes, and that's how she has to survive and live her life. The captives are told that they will be let go after the final scene, but our main character is convinced that they're just all going to be murdered. So we are in this very tricky, suspenseful balance between wanting her to get to the final scene and hopefully escape, but also dreading that she's going to be killed either before then or after it's over. It is such a unique setup for a thriller, and this thriller is simultaneously like so cleverly done and smartly written, but also so unserious and ridiculous. It's the perfect balance. I loved it so much, and the isolated setting is the cherry on it all, because clearly they're kidnapped. They cannot see the rest of the world, and they start going stir crazy. They're also blending the difference between like their actual reality and the play acting that they do for the kidnapper's trauma. It's so trippy. It's so weird. It's kind of that like mind-fucked feeling of being isolated in something that is not your reality for an extended period of time. Oh my god, it is so good. I feel like it's so unknown. It's on KU. You'll have to go read it. Next up, I have Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. In this thriller, we are following a bunch of people on the way to a ski chalet, like beautiful wintry vacation, but on the way, their bus breaks down in the snow, and they are isolated out there alone, no service, trying to survive the elements when one of them turns up dead. And soon they are all getting picked off one by one by one. They cannot reach anyone to try to get rescued. They are not only trying to survive the elements, but now each other. And everyone is a suspect. I was absolutely enraptured by this book. I could not put it down. I had so much fun making my little suspect list and trying to decide who the murderer was. And the setting lended so much to my enjoyment of the book. The way that they're isolated in the middle of nowhere in the wilderness heightens the tension and the suspense, and the descriptions of the wilderness were just beautiful in this book. Darcy Coates is such a talented writer in setting the atmosphere. She's also great at describing the blood and guts of it all. Of course, Darcy Coates usually does horror. I do think this reads more like a thriller than horror, but in the descriptions of the deaths, it is quite graphic, and her little horror chops definitely shine there. I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. I feel like a lot of thriller readers aren't going to go for Darcy Coates, but this is one you will definitely love. Next up, we have Everyone is Watching by Heather Gudenkauf. I read it at the beginning of last year, and I feel like I haven't talked about it since, but I still really loved this book. It's about a group of people who are isolated in this huge mansion together to compete on a reality show. They have zero contact with the outside world, and it literally says verbatim on the back, they start to feel a little too isolated. As they're going through this game show, it is live streamed to everyone unbeknownst to them. They don't care. They are just out for the money And it's all fun and games until someone is out for more than the money. They are out for blood. And again, people start turning up dead one by one. It has that paranoid, isolated, crazy energy to it. There is drama. There is like eat the rich vibes in here. It's twisty. It's fun. This is another one I read super fast because I just couldn't put it down. Next up, we have Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moraine. This is an apocalyptic horror book, very, very similar to Bird Box, and it is all about isolation. Our main character lives in a world that is ravaged by this disease where if you make eye contact with another person, there's a risk of the both of you going crazy and killing each other. In a world where you're not allowed to make eye contact, you no longer have access to human connection. That is the most isolated world that I could imagine, and that feeling really comes through in this book. However, our main character starts to doubt what's happening around her because there's very little research on this disease, and she also has someone show up at her door, which hasn't happened in months. So she plays around with risking looking at them. This was such an easy 5-star read, and I cannot believe more people aren't reading this and raving about it. It is like Bird Box with more commentary in it. It is so isolated, and not only in the setting because we're living in a like post-apocalyptic pandemic world, but also in the sense that our character is so isolated even from the people around her because of her inability to look them in the eyes. There's so much commentary around that. I could literally rave about this book forever. Please trust me, go read it. It's phenomenal. Next up, we have a classic rec. Oh my god, I feel like this is like vintage Hailey recommendation. I haven't talked about this book in so long, and that is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This is a play on The Turn of the Screw, where we are following a little live-in nanny girly, and she goes to take care of these 2 little girls in a smart home for the extremely rich, extremely busy parents. But things start going wrong about the house. She starts to doubt herself, wonder if things are haunted or if this smart house is possibly being controlled by someone with sinister motives. She is really out at the end of the day to protect herself and the girls, but she is getting increasingly freaked out, paranoid, and panicky as things go wrong. The twist at the end of this book literally had me in a chokehold. I love it so much, and the atmosphere is what shines throughout the entirety of the story. Our main character feels so isolated. She has no other adults around her. It's literally just her and these little tiny girls. So she has nobody to really like talk things through with, and that's why her imagination starts to run wild. Also, the house itself is isolated in the middle of nowhere. It's this very eerie idea of like this super high-tech smart house in the middle of the wilderness on a cliff. Like, this is what I imagine like Elon Musk's kids and family to be like, and I don't ever want to be there. If there's one thing that's gonna thrill me in a bad way, it's the idea of living as Elon Musk's child. Please, everyone pour one out for his poor children. Next up, we have a book that does run more on the horror side of things, but thriller lovers, please hear me out. Please, I promise you it is worth the read. And that is Near the Bone by Christina Henry. We are following a woman who lives very remote, literally in the middle of nowhere. It's just her and her husband, and they sustain themselves off the land. Even when it's snowy, they go out and they hunt and they make this little life for themselves. But when they find an animal brutally murdered in the forest, they start to fear that they are not as alone as they thought they were. And maybe something or someone is with them, stalking them, and maybe they want to hurt them. We follow the thing that is out there in the woods, and we are also following how that is an allegory for her relationship with her husband. It has really great feminist commentary in here. There is a rep for a lot of different things that could be triggering but also could be spoilery, so look up trigger warnings if you're sensitive to things like that to make sure that you're not going to hurt yourself by reading this book. This was such an easy 5-star to me. It was so meaningful and so suspenseful, and it kind of encapsulates what the perfect isolated setting is to me. Of course, it's remote, right? It's snowy, it's cut off, you can't contact anyone, and distance-wise, it's far from everyone, but it's also about our main character's psyche and the way that she feels so isolated from everyone in her life. It is just incredible. Next up, let's talk about night watching. Oh my god. This is another one that I low-key forgot about. I recommended it last year when I read it, and then I just kind of like never went beyond my wrap-up. I have to talk about it again, especially when we're talking about isolated settings, because this is about a mother and her 2 children who are stuck in their house in like a closet, I believe, as someone breaks into their home. And if y'all know me, you know home invasion stuff is just like the freakiest thing to me. I cannot read it alone. I get so freaked out. And this is that in a nutshell. The entirety of the book happens on this one night, and I believe there are some flashbacks in there as well to give context about the family dynamic, but it's mostly happening on this one night as this man is creeping through the halls. And talk about isolated. They're literally all pressed into this closet and they cannot leave, or this man's gonna kill them. I remember it being very haunting. Like the atmosphere felt so tense, and like if you made the smallest little noise, everything was gonna come crashing down around you. But at the same time, it had this like moody, almost like introspective literary part of it as well. It still is paced like a thriller, but there were some literary elements in here where the writing was just gorgeous and the metaphors were so apt. I just think this is a really well done thriller that has something to say beyond the thrills of the plot. And the isolated setting was the cherry on top. Loved it so much. Next up, let's talk about one of my favorite thrillers from 2024, and that is What Happened to the Bennetts by Lisa Scottoline. This is about a family who goes through just tragedy. Okay, I'm not gonna give away exactly what it is, but something really crazy happens to them. And the next morning after this event, they get a knock on their door, and it's the FBI, and they're like, hey, because of what went down, y'all have to go into witness protection. So they are completely isolated in a safe house on the beach in the middle of nowhere. They have to leave behind all their family, all their friends, their house, all their belongings. They have to start over completely. And it's super emotional. You really get into the family dynamic. But then beyond that, there are secrets and lies that start coming to the surface in the wake of this event and their isolation. We see how every single different member of the family is handling the isolation differently, and eventually how the different ways that they're handling things might come back to bite them. It is so emotional. I cried reading it. It is so heart-pumping and fast-paced. I could not stop flipping chapters one after the other, and I just couldn't stop thinking the entirety that I was reading this book, like, what would I do in this situation? I would literally just cry every day. Like, I could not leave everything behind and be so isolated in that way where, like, I can't even go to the grocery store in case somehow somebody recognizes me from the news. Like, I could not live like that. It was so intense. Next up, we have one of my favorites from Riley Sager, and that is The House Across the Lake. I knew that I had to put a Riley Sager book on this list because I think Riley Sager does isolated settings really well, and this is my favorite way that he's ever done it. I know that this is a very unpopular opinion. Some others might have chosen Lock Every Door or The Only One Left, which I really like those books as well, but this one just takes it for me because of the campy ridiculousness of it, and I feel like there's no other book like this on this list either. In The House Across the Lake, we are following a woman who is struggling with addiction and shame and embarrassment after she publicly did something really embarrassing that affected her celebrity career, and her celebrity mother was like, hey queen, you need to go isolate and recover really quick. Go to our little expensive exclusive lake house and sleep it off. And while she's there, she's looking out about her like beautiful glass lake house mansion, and she sees another celebrity couple across the lake, and her alcoholic paranoid ass starts looking at them, and she's just got her binoculars on. She's looking at them literally every day. That's her entertainment because she's the main character of a thriller, so of course it is. And then one day she realizes that the wife in the couple she's been watching is missing. And she goes into this whole conspiracy of what might have happened to her. We eventually find out not only what happened to her, but this whole bigger conspiracy about what happened to our main character beforehand. There are so many interconnected subplots. It is so tropey. It just feels like a classic thriller with a brand new twist on it, because there is a wild twist in here that turns everything on its head. It is so campy. It's so crazy. It's so out of left field. I loved it so much. It's super controversial, but what can I say? It just worked for me. Like, this is a 5-star thriller for me. If you're curious about it, I would say take a chance on it. You're either going to come back to this video and say, oh my god, that was so much fun, 5 stars, or you're gonna say, Haley, what the hell did you make me read? This is 1 star. What the fuck is wrong with you? And honestly, either way, you're feeling something. So like, I can't even be mad. And the last book that I have in this video to round out the top 12, except it's not really the last book because I have 4 more recommendations over on Patreon. If you ever want to see the extended cut of my book recommendation videos, I have 4 more bonus recs up on Patreon. I will link the extended cut down below if you are interested. But the last book in my top 12 is what I would call the OG isolated thriller. Okay, I read this like 5-6 years ago, and I have not stopped referring to it as the original perfectly done isolated thriller, and that is An Unwanted Guest by Sherry Lapina. This is flawless, okay? This is a flawlessly done modern murder mystery. It's about a group of people. They're all pretty much strangers to each other. There's like couples, there's like a mom and a son, there's like a bunch of individual people, some friends, just a smattering of people going to stay at this B&B for a relaxing wintry vacation. However, when they're all snowed in at the B&B, tension starts rising because the food is spoiling and they don't have any way to contact anyone. It feels immediately like these are the only people on Earth. And of course, because it's a murder mystery, people start turning up dead one by one, and we just have to figure out who the killer is. It's a very classic setup for a snowy, isolated thriller, but this one does it so well. I was kept guessing until the very end. The red herrings and different plot devices that are used in here are so clever. It was twisty, it was fun, it was atmospheric. The isolated nature of it was definitely a character in the story. You know how there are some books sometimes where like the setting feels like such a huge part of it that it's like a character that the other characters are interacting with? That's how I felt about the isolated B&B in this story. It's just so aptly described, so visually interesting. I can see it like a movie in my head, and I love it so much. If you like a snowy, isolated thriller, you have got to read this one. And with that, those are all of my top 12 isolated thriller recommendations. I hope you guys liked this video and got a couple good recs out of it. Don't forget to go down below and check out the extended cut on Patreon if you want 4 more recommendations. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you guys again so much for watching, and thank you again to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to go down below and check them out if you're wanting to learn a new language. You can get 60% off your lifetime membership with my link. And of course, don't forget to go to therapy and read a book this week, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!